The Tom Woods Show, episode 1759.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Folks, if you're like me, one of the most demoralizing things is when someone utters the truth and then lamely apologizes. Well, not these folks. I've got a free ebook of stories from heroic professors who told the PC mob to go pound sand. Stories from Jordan Peterson, Michael Rechtenwald, and others. Check it out at againstthemob.com. Hi, everybody. Tom Woods here. I've got a great episode for you today, and it's a long one, but I think it's pretty darn good. And it's an episode that I did with Thaddeus Russell on his Unregistered podcast. Now, Thaddeus is an academic. He's been a college professor at numerous places, starting at Barnard College at Columbia. And he's the author of A Renegade History of the United States. And he also is the creator of Renegade University. So before we start the episode, I want to tell you that he has actually made a special deal available to you guys. If you've heard of Renegade University and been tempted to join, this might be just the thing. Renegade University is in some ways comparable to my Liberty Classroom, with maybe some different topics covered, different sorts of faculty and so on. But what they've done is they've created 3 packages of video courses designed for listeners of my show. So they've got courses by Scott Horton on the Afghanistan War and the War on Terror. They've got Thad's own courses on his Renegade History of the United States, as well as the history of race in America. And he also has courses on World War II and the history of U.S. foreign policy. For each package, you can get 25% off at renegadeuniversity.com/woods. So I just want to lay that out for you guys. It's not an affiliate relationship. I don't get $1 from this. Not that there'd be anything wrong with that, but this is just to promote Renegade University, which I think is a great thing and I believe in, and I think you guys, more importantly, I think you guys would get a lot out of it. So this is a good time to sample their offerings with this 25% off deal. So renegadeuniversity.com/woods. In the episode you're about to hear, Thad and I talk about everything and anything under the sun, starting with our experience in the Columbia University History Department, where it turns out we were there at more or less the same time with the same dissertation director who recently deceased, Alan Brinkley. And then beyond that, it's just one great topic after another. Well, of course, we talk a little bit about the lockdowns, but that's just almost incidental to all the other topics we discuss. So, hope you have a long drive today. Enjoy.
When he was in 6th grade, my guest this week was told that he knew too much and asked too many questions. Then, many years later, he was again told that he asked too many questions, and this time that he had the wrong answers. And so they stopped him from doing what he wanted to do, which was to teach. They wouldn't let him teach. And so what did he do? He started his own school. And he built his own platform, his own virtual lecture hall. And since then, he has taught thousands and thousands of people, far more than he would have if he had stayed just a college teacher. One of the people he's taught is me. This is my interview with Tom Woods.
I am joined from Florida by a guy I've been listening to for a very long time. Well, I've known for even longer, but I became a fan of his coincidentally about 5 years ago. This is Tom Woods, who many of you will know. Many fans of this show are also fans of Tom's. Tom has a show called The Tom Woods Show, which has been on for 170 years. Tom, how many episodes do you have now?
It's over 1,740 at this point.
1,740 episodes. So I started listening to you when I first found out about libertarians, and this would have been about 6 or 7 years ago. And I just, I got steered to your show. And also, you and I had gone to graduate school together at Columbia University in the same program.
As it turns out, yeah.
We were in the U.S. history program at Columbia almost at exactly the same time, and yet we met exactly one single time. Do you remember that time?
You keep telling me about it. And it's not that you're not a memorable person. I just can't recall this incident.
I'm so offended. No, we met for about 30 seconds. We were simply introduced in Alan Brinkley's office, and that was that. So I don't blame you.
Okay, but was he your advisor? He was mine.
He was my advisor too. We had the same advice.
Advised both of us. How about that? Okay.
And we didn't know each other. Well, it's your fault because you were reclusive. Although it's not your fault because you were forced to be reclusive. right?
I sure was. I remember one thing about Alan Brinkley. He was the son of David Brinkley, the newscaster. That
Yes.
name won't be familiar to some of the young listeners, but some of the older ones will remember. And he had that very plain sort of personality that his father had. So one day I walked in to his office and I was a wreck. I hadn't shaved in forever, and I didn't have a beard at that time. I just looked terrible, and I wanted to explain to him why. And I said, well, I have this bet going on with this other person where I live, and until one of us accomplishes such and such, we're not going to shave. And he simply said, well, that's none of my concern. He was strictly business. He did not care about anything.
That sounds like Alan. Yeah, he was. My feelings about him. So for those who don't know, he died 2 years ago, I think, and he was certainly one of the most eminent historians in the country. I mean, I would say top 10, just in terms of prestige and fame. And he was in the media quite a bit. He wrote several books and several important articles. And Tom, I don't know if you really dug into his work on the New Deal, but the more I read it, the more sophisticated it was. I sort of underestimated him as a scholar when I was a grad student. I thought he was a wonderful advisor and he was very supportive of me and very good to me consistently. But I didn't think his work was all that special, but it is actually. And a lot of the questions, by the way, that you deal with now, he addresses head on. So basically, like, we don't have to get too far into this, but he has this whole book on antitrust, the antitrust movement in the first half of the 20th century. And it's really about the growth of corporatism. It's really about the history of the emergence of corporatism as an economic system in this country, which you and I both agree is essentially, it is a major component of fascism. Alan doesn't call it that, but the sort of co-managed economy.
I'm pretty sure his book, The End of Reform, he was working on while you and I were students.
Yes.
And that had to do with his take on the New Deal also. But the other thing that he was known for was rather different from some of the academic interests of the typical Columbia professor. He knew about American conservatism.
Right.
He'd written quite a bit about that. And so, we had some connection there because I was interested in that. I was more of a conservative than a libertarian in those days. And we could have conversations and it wasn't flying over his head. He knew the names, he knew the people. The fact is, he and I did not see eye to eye politically, but he navigated me through that program such that when I finished, of course I had a PhD, but I also had a book that when I finished my dissertation, I expanded it a little bit. It became a book published by Columbia University Press. That was a book he had advised me on, and that is no small accomplishment. So I really owe him a lot.
Yeah, and I got out of it, and at his editor at Knopf, who edited my dissertation, which became a book. I mean, he was that generous.
That is tremendous.
Yeah, he emailed his editor at Knopf, which was a huge publisher, and they rarely did publish dissertations. And he said, "Hey, are you interested in this book?" And the guy said, "Yeah." And the next thing I knew, so I'm not surprised he treated you that well. I mean, I was pretty much towing the party line, though. You were not. When you got to Columbia and throughout Columbia, you had an evil politics, Tom, and so we couldn't really talk to you. In fact, I don't know why they let you in, but you ostracized yourself, but you would have been ostracized by us if you had tried to be friends with us, but you were on your own, right, for those years.
Well, I did try to be friends with some people in the history department. And a couple things that worked against me was, one, I was unmarried and most of them were married. And one thing you learn is when you're dealing with your married friends, they have completely different priorities from you and availability from you.
Right.
I'm ready to go out every night. These people have to stay home for domestic reasons. So there was that problem.
Right.
But the other thing was, I remember there was one social event I was at with several graduate students and their wives, and I made one mildly critical remark about affirmative action, and I was never contacted again. I'm not kidding you. So I ended up making my own friends outside the history department. But by the way, you don't sell yourself short here, because I think the kind of work you did that culminated in the Renegades history, that's clearly not the establishment view of American history. And I bet it's a view of American history that made Alan Brinkley uncomfortable.
Well, you want to hear the story? So that the story is that I was kind of a star as a grad student, and they treated me well. They gave me everything I asked for and wanted. I got TAs, I got jobs, I got fellowships, I got everything. And then I finished. And then when I defended my dissertation, they realized what I'd been writing all these years. They hadn't really been paying attention. They just knew that I was doing well as a teacher, and they liked me. But Eric Foner just sat there and lied during my dissertation defense about my dissertation, and made sort of political comments about it rather than investigating the scholarship at all. It was remarkable. It was the moment when I realized that Foner was a phony. This is Eric Foner, who was the historian laureate,
big celebrity, yes,
biggest historian really in the country. He was the historian laureate under Obama, which is a position created, I think, just for him. He was that big of a deal. And Eric was, I mean, I had been his TA like 4 times. We knew each other really well. And I am presenting my work here that I've been working on for years, and he's just like, he's making stuff up. He says there's a market argument in it, vis-a-vis labor unions, which we don't have to get into. And he said, so the market, huh? So tell me what the market's done lately for people.
What does that have to do with anything?
It's the dumbest question you could even ask. And it's not about my dissertation. Yeah. And the rest of them, I had like a whole panel of basically labor commie historians. So I had Nelson Lichtenstein, and I had Josh Freeman, all these guys who were just like total lifelong commie labor historians. And I was arguing that competition between labor unions was actually good for the working class because it forced them to be accountable, right? It was actually sort of a libertarian argument applied to the labor movement, which I don't really care about anymore. But like at the time, it was my first
interesting.
It was, and it was right too. I mean, I was arguing that Jimmy Hoffa was really militant because he faced a lot of competition from other unions who wanted his members, right? You get it. Like most normal people like to say, oh, of course, yeah, no kidding. Yeah,
right.
But they were like,
logic of it is.
But they said in this thing, they said, no, this can't be right. This can't be right because there needs to be one labor union. There needs to be fewer labor unions because they need more power, more political power. They need more managerial, governmental power. We can't have them fighting against each other. Of course, when you have a socialist project, right, when you're a socialist, you can't have the unions fighting against each other. You need one big union. So they were allergic to the concept, and they just did not want me to argue it, even though it was obviously true. It was ridiculous. But So they found out at the very, very end of my career that I was a bad guy. Barnard College had not gotten the news yet, so they hired me full time, which ended up being about a 6-year gig. And my classes took off. I doubled and tripled the size of the classes that I inherited there. So they said, oh, you know what? We're going to let you teach the Intro to American History survey course for all Columbia history majors and all Barnard history majors. They are required. So I was teaching 200 of these kids all the time. The history of the United States. Me, Thaddeus Russell, at Columbia University, arguably the top history department in history.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Well, that's when I started to develop the ideas that became Renegade History of the United States. And I did this entirely on my own. I just started looking at the narrative and thinking, this has got to be corrected. They're missing the prostitutes. They're missing the criminals. They're missing all these, miscreants. And also I had, very different ideas about the ruling class by that point. And I started to have a more sophisticated analysis of the state and foreign policy and all these things. And it was super popular. The kids loved it, but no faculty ever came and watched me. No faculty ever listened to what I was arguing. No faculty knew what I was doing. They just saw that the numbers were growing, so they kept giving me a job. Then a tenure track position came open in exactly my field. I was the director of the American Studies program at Barnard College by this point, and a position came open with tenure track funding for that. And so all my colleagues said, oh, you've got it. It's just a pro forma thing. You're so popular. You've already got a book published by Knopf. You're working on your second. This has been no problem. You're going to get this job. I said, are you sure? Yeah, you just give your job talk and we'll give you the job. Oh, really? All right.
Oh, no, the job talk is the problem.
Exactly. So I had to give a lecture to basically the entire faculty of Barnard and Columbia, because the American Studies program is also run by the Columbia department. So you had like really famous people there. I don't have to name them, but famous, prestigious faculty. Probably 70 or 80 people in there. And I gave my talk about how Martin Luther King was puritanical and about how the most popular black preachers of the 1950s were actually flaming homosexuals and queer, and that the civil rights movement was puritanical and homophobic, and they crushed the whole gay black culture of the 1950s, which was gigantic. I talked about black drag queens, which was a huge thing in the 1950s, no one knew about. I quoted Martin Luther King saying the most puritanical, anti-black culture things you could imagine. We are lazy and we need to be more like white people. We need to stop having sex all the time. He sounded like the Ku Klux Klan, but it's true. It's like King had this streak in him that has been ignored. So I gave this talk. One of the faculty walked out during it. There were several others who just stared at their shoes. And then I got several hostile questions from professors who had been my professors for years at that point, like Betsy Blackmar and others.
Oh, sure.
And then I had several faculty come up to me, and I know this is a long story, but they came up to me, and some of them said, that's the most brilliant job talk I've ever heard. And I thought, oh, I've got this. And then about a few days later, I heard that there was just a deluge of emails coming into the search committee telling them that in no way could I be hired for this job because I was inappropriate, dangerous, and unacceptable.
That should be the name of your podcast.
Yeah. Yeah. And so they said, we got to let you go. And I was like, wow, we're going to hire someone else. I said, Jesus, who are you going to hire? And they named this person. It was a person you and I went to graduate school with. I don't know if you know her, but who happens to be a Black woman. And who didn't do anything even close to resembling American studies. She didn't do cultural history. She did economic history, but econometric
I think I know who
history.
You're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, younger than us, but yeah. I think you might. She was definitely there when you were there. They gave it to her, even though she had nothing to do with cultural history, which is what this job was. And so it was obvious it was just purely identity based. Yeah. And then I found out that they had vowed, the chair of the department had vowed before the search that she would not hire a male historian for the position. No man would be hired. Well,
that's a relief. Whew.
Totally illegal.
I was afraid there might be a male historian.
Yeah, exactly. Totally illegal, but they do it anyway. Anyway, that's my story. So then I was done. I thought academia was closed to me. I thought I was dead in the water, and I was walking around Central Park with nothing. And I said, I have these lectures. I could maybe publish them as some supplement for high school history courses or something. But I knew people in publishing, and next thing I knew, I got a big contract, which became Renegade History of the United States. So that's my story with Columbia. What's yours?
Well, I will say a quick thing about my dissertation defense and then the oral exam that you have to take before you can start on the dissertation. Because you mentioned Betsy Blackmar. Now, that's not a name most people will know.
No.
Elizabeth Blackmar. She was like an urban historian, maybe.
Yeah.
Interested in the history of New York and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I had her on my oral exam committee because I didn't want Foner. And the only other 19th century person was Blackmar.
Right.
And I remember during the thing, there were a couple of points I made that she challenged me on which I was dead right. So, for example, Andrew, I know it's fashionable these days to say Andrew Carnegie. I refuse to say that. I'm still calling him Carnegie. He's dead. He's not going to bother me about that.
Right.
But I said that Andrew Carnegie was an anti-imperialist who offered to buy the Philippines from the U.S. government so he could give them their independence. Yeah. However, she couldn't accept this because in her brain, he was a businessman. Businessmen favor imperialism because capitalism is she could, because her robotic brain couldn't process that.
Wow.
So she said, "Oh, I don't think that's true." Well, okay, excuse me. I don't give a what you think is true, right? I don't care what you think. This happens to be a fact. So this happened several times during the exam. I still passed it. But then on my defense, I had all good people. I had somebody from Barnard. His name was Randy Ballmer.
Yeah, Randall Ballmer. He's good.
You know him.
Yeah, he's good. Yeah.
He had a series called Religion in American Life or Religion in American Culture, something like that. And But then also alongside him, we had Ken Jackson. Now, he was the big urban historian at Columbia. He taught the huge History of the City of New York course. Okay. And I had been a TA for him.
Mm-hmm.
And after the defense, I passed with flying colors. He came up to me and said, "Tom, you're so much better than this dissertation." He was very down on it. I thought, that's a very strange thing to say. Then Ballmer comes up to me and says, "This thing is so good, I want to publish it in my series for Columbia University Press." And I thought, all right. So I have somebody who's actually qualified, who thinks it's fantastic.
Right.
And then I have an urban historian who obviously resented having to spend the time on something so far outside his field. It was a damn good dissertation.
I'm sure. That's great that they published it. I was Ken's, what was I? I hung out with Ken a lot. I think I was his research assistant, or maybe as his TA too. I forget. But Ken's a nice guy. Let's just put it that way.
He was very, every other time that I interacted with him, he was, in fact, when I needed to get reference letters, his policy was, you write me the letter you want me to write and I'll sign it.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah, he was really. I love talking about basketball with Ken Jackson. Let's just put it that way. He wasn't he wasn't the deepest thinker in the department.
Yeah, but you don't have to be for that field, really. You just have to know a lot.
That's right. People don't know this. It's actually an anti-intellectual field generally. U.S. history, most U.S. historians, right, don't read theory. They don't, I mean, not Mises and Hayek. They won't read Marx and Foucault either. I mean, they just don't read theory. Most of them consider themselves to be objective storytellers. You just see the facts and you just put them on the page and the story tells itself, right? That's what I found. The most of our colleagues in that field, don't you think?
I haven't interacted with them enough, but that was kind of the impression that I got.
Yeah.
Let's say, just as an observer.
Right. Yeah, as an outsider. So you get there and you're a conservative, like a Republican type conservative, right?
Yeah, well, I was going through all kinds of weird transformations. So when I got to college, I left high school like a Republican, but the kind of Republican I can't stand now because a Republican who's bad on everything. I was a hawk, and I thought, well, we do need a lot of spending on the following things. So I wasn't reliable on anything except war. On that, you could rely on me. I was in favor of everything. And then I started to change on that because I started to read Chronicles magazine, which was like very right of center, but not the kind of right of center I had ever seen before. And they were decrying the warfare state. And I thought, hard to accuse these people of being communists. So I thought, wait a minute, what? So you mean there's a third way to think? And of course, there's more than a third. There's a fourth, a fifth. But I was an uncreative kid, and I just thought I had to choose between Bill Clinton and George Bush. I mean, that's what we have.
Yeah.
And in fact, the first beer I drank as an undergrad was in 1992. It was the night Bill Clinton won because I thought that meant the end of civilization. I would take Bill Clinton back in 5 seconds right now if I could have him. But I was such a ridiculous partisan in those days. So then for a couple of years, I did toward the end of undergrad, so 93, 94, I did kind of drift into libertarianism. I liked Austrian economics. But by the mid 90s, I respected the libertarians, but I thought, nah, if we're going to fight the left, which in my view was the top priority, it's not enough to say we have our general abstract principle. No, screw that. We're going to defend specific, particular things and places and whatever. So that was when I went through my more or less paleocon phase from probably about 95 to 2000.
Okay.
And I remember the once or twice that I spoke at the Mises Institute during those years. So I remember Lou Rockwell sending me an email saying, Tom, when you speak here, would you mind if you wore your Mises hat rather than your Buchanan hat? Okay, Lou, sure. I still have a Mises hat hanging in the closet. I'll put that on for you.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, later on, I would say by 2001, I was pretty firmly Rothbardian anarcho-capitalist. But I had gone through but I was the kind of guy who, the people who don't like me go back and they find terrible things I did in those years. They don't know the half of it. I mean, I wanted to ban all kinds of rock lyrics because I thought, how does this contribute to human flourishing? It doesn't. So all this stuff, like death metal lyrics, all that should be banned. Yeah. Like I was with Bob Dole on that. All that should be banned. I thought, if people knew the half of what I believe in, and they're picking on stupid things, they don't know the half of it. I refer to it as my Saudi Arabia phase.
I was going to say, you were like the Taliban for a second there.
I was, yes. Thank goodness I didn't write about most of my crazy opinions, so there's no paper trail. It's just in my head.
The funny thing is, you would not get in nearly as much trouble as, the one time you gave the talk at what's it called? The League of the South or whatever. I know. You appeared with
funny.
Go ahead.
That League of the South thing, Eric Foner was obsessed with it.
Oh, was he?
Back when it was, he was getting the newsletter. He would have it on his desk. He was very concerned about it. He even wrote a little bit about it. But at that time, it was obvious. All you have to do is look at the names who were there. It was all a bunch of nerdy PhDs. That's all it was.
Right.
I mean, Clyde Wilson's a nerdy PhD. Thomas Fleming got his PhD from UNC Chapel Hill in classics.
Right.
not exactly gonna, overthrow the U.S. government, right? The whole list of them was all. Don Livingston was a Hume scholar at Emory. I mean, we're all harmless little nerds who thought we were going to accomplish something, right? So yeah, he was obsessed with it. But
oh man,
but then of course in the when the 21st century came along, unfortunately, it took some crazy turn, and then I thought, son of a, so then I'm now associated with every crazy bullshit thing they do and say, but I'm just never ever going to be the kind of person who apologizes for something they didn't do wrong. I didn't do anything wrong. I was interested in the South. I thought Eugene Genovese was right that there is some value in Southern civilization. It's not just slavery.
Yeah.
And that it's ridiculous the way Southerners are treated. And I said this as a lifelong Northerner. I have no particular dog in this hunt.
Right.
And then it meant that I was getting smeared and attacked and abused. And I just thought, I could get these people off my backs by saying, "Oh, I am so sorry I did something that you didn't approve of," but I couldn't live with myself. Fuck these people.
Yeah. Good for you for cursing too, Tom. I've never heard you curse.
Sorry.
It's fantastic.
It's the Thaddeus Russell.
It's about time.
There.
I've listened to hundreds of your shows. Never once have I heard you curse.
Well, I think there's one or two where I cursed and then we bleeped me out. I bleeped myself out on my own show just to be funny.
Don't do that. Let yourself be free, Tom. So
I'll tell you the main reason I do it is not so much that that's just Woods' personality. I mean, to some degree it is, but it's mainly that I want to be the podcast that mom and dad can listen to and not worry about in the car.
Right. Yeah, this is my problem. My audience is limited for a bunch of reasons, and that's one of them. So I'm struck by. I guess I didn't realize that your whole political transformation really occurred while you were at Columbia. Like you went,
yes,
you did the whole thing.
You and I wouldn't have gotten along in the beginning.
Oh no!
At the end, I would have gotten along with you.
Oh yeah,
but
no.
But at the beginning, no.
I mean, I'm quite sure I assumed you had a characterological flaw or evil in some way. I mean, at first, I didn't put a whole lot of thought to you. We were more concerned with Vin Cannato. You must have been friends with him.
Who was that?
Oh, do you know Vincent Cannato? Vin Cannato?
No. How do I not know these names?
He was the other Republican there.
I never met him.
Yeah.
I was looking.
Yeah. Well, he came, I think, after you, and but he hung out with us. He played poker with us, but he was a Republican who actually worked for the party. He campaigned for, I forget which candidate was his, and he's now got a job at UMass Amherst teaching. He's been a professor. He wrote a good book, I think, on Lindsay and New York City. But anyway, so that's
okay.
But you did all that by yourself, like locked away in your little apartment that we all lived in. You went through that whole transformation.
Especially when there's very little internet in those days. I mean, it existed, but it wasn't the encyclopedic. Every answer was available. So yeah, it was a matter of I had to think and be able to say I'm wrong about this or I'm wrong about that, which is by the way a hard thing to do when you're Ivy League educated. So you have the same kind of Ivy League hubris every kid has that I know it all. Right? Mm-hmm. I went to these schools. I know it all. And then to say, maybe I'm looking at the world all wrong is a hard thing to do. And then now today, of course, as I say, I get abused and, oh my gosh, look at the things that he was doing in the 1990s. But it was hard for me to say, okay, I'm on the wrong track. I need to do something different. I mean, I give myself credit for that.
Yeah. I wonder if Mises is even in the Butler Library at Columbia. Like, how would you even?
He's got to be.
I'm sure he is, but I mean, no one ever checks it out.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, I was going to say, yeah. So we know for a fact he's in the library. It's just no one's reading him. I mean, look, if my books are in Columbia's library, I know his are.
I'm not sure mine is. I haven't checked. I wonder. I'm not even sure. I had not heard of Ludwig von Mises until many years after I got my PhD, Tom. Many years. I'd never heard the name. I taught Hayek in the Contemporary Civilization, the Great Books course at Columbia. And that's the only reason I knew anything about Hayek. But these guys were simply not discussed. So, I did 4.5 years undergraduate. I did 8 years as a graduate student at an elite school in the social sciences, basically. Isn't this remarkable? And the only economist, Tom Woods, I ever read during those years, those 12 plus years, 13 years, was Karl Marx. I mean, It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean,
and no one ever
story.
said, oh, you know what, you should brush up on economics a bit. Oh, you should read maybe a couple of economics texts if you're going to be a PhD in social science. It was never a problem because no one else was either. No one else knew any economics. We never talked economics. We just knew
that's right.
We just knew what good economics was and bad economics was, meaning moral economics and immoral economics.
Yeah. And that,
amazing.
As I'm sure you know, your story could be repeated, millions of times over by other people. I knew the name Mises, just the name, because starting in high school, I subscribed to National Review when Bill Buckley was still alive. I thought that made me cheeky. I got National Review as a high school student and into college, and they would mention the name Mises. And so I figured this must be a pretty good guy, but that was as far as it went. One time I was auditing Alan Brinkley's 20th Century Survey course. It was an undergraduate course, but I thought just in preparation for the oral exams, it couldn't hurt to brush up, especially with the guy who's going to be examining me. It couldn't hurt to sit in on this class. So I would audit that class. And of course, I kept my mouth shut back there. And it was a lecture course anyway. You don't typically participate. But every once in a while, a hand would go up and he would call on somebody. And it was a day he was talking about the Great Depression, and he was putting forward the different theories as to why the Great Depression occurred. So, he's got the underconsumption theory and all this. And then he says, now there's a right-wing theory that taxes and tariffs cause the problem, but we all know that can't be right because of, and that was the entirety of the other way of, so it was going to be, we have these sophisticated models, and then we have this dumb guy, Jude Wanniski model.
Right.
So I just couldn't sit there. So I raised my hand, and I took a minute and a half to explain, and I just used the name Hayek so as not to alarm Brinkley, as I knew he respected Hayek. And I said, Hayek's theory, which actually won him the Nobel Prize, was the following. And, that probably also deserves mention. And he was respectful, and he mentioned the importance of Hayek, and then he continued. And I thought, okay, I've done my job. I just needed them to know that there was more to the story.
What a citadel, what a cathedral it is, it's the uniformity of thought. It's remarkable how well they kept so many contrary ideas sealed out of that place. This is Columbia University, which is a graduate school factory with multiple graduate programs teaching all sorts of social science and humanities. And yet I never had to read economics. Basic ideas in economics, like, their theory, supply side theories or whatever, free market theories about the cause of the Great Depression were kept out. I mean, really basic stuff. Eric Foner, whose parents were famous communists, and I was his TA many times, he would give lectures on the Communist Party in his American Radical Tradition course, which I was a TA for. And Tom, I don't know if you know this, the Communist Party USA, it was just a civil rights organization, and it helped labor unions. That's it. That's all it did, man. That's all it did. It was really on the side of the good people, and period. Like no mention that it was working with the Soviet Union. No mention.
Yeah. I'm sure it didn't toe the Kremlin line on anything.
Oh no! Yeah, no. Well, the USSR was simply not mentioned in the narrative about the Communist Party. It was not. That was just an incidental thing, I suppose. Or they didn't even mention it. What are you going to do with people like this? We're in the arguably top institution, the most famous history program there is. Movies have been made about it, right? The Marathon Man. You know about that? That was based on Columbia history graduate students.
No, I didn't.
Yeah, Dustin Hoffman was one of us, and he ends up chasing Nazis, and Nazis end up torturing him. But yeah, it actually starts with a whole bunch of grad students on the steps of Lowe, and they're talking about, hey, did you get that course from so-and-so professor? Oh, wow, I didn't get it. I mean, they're doing all the same stuff that we did, but back in the 1960s, I guess. But it's about the Columbia History Department and U.S. history, too. It's about us.
That's pretty good.
So it's very famous, and it's in New York City, the most cosmopolitan city on earth, and yet we were treated like monks, right? To be protected from the outside world.
Yeah, and yet even the monks were apparently copying texts, some of which were secular. At least sometimes they were even exposed to things other than just religious texts. And yet,
I guess so.
I mean, it reminds me of, I've used this example before. Maybe an organization called Liberty Fund. They publish a lot of books in inexpensive editions, like the collected works of Adam Smith.
Right.
Some of them are more interesting than others, but they keep these old things in print.
Right.
And they hold, and this is not generally known to the general public, but they hold these scholarly colloquia where somebody proposes a topic, they come up with some readings, they put them in a binder, and 15 scholars from around the country are sent the binder, and they're invited to come for a weekend at some fancy hotel, and they're paid like $1,000 to be there for the weekend and just discuss the reading. It was one of the most, I did this in the late 90s and early 2000s. One of the most amazing things about academia was I go to a hotel I could never afford to stay in. There was a TV in my bathroom in one of these hotels. But the thing about it was, at first, it was all libertarians, and we'd just get together, we'd get to know each other, we'd build some camaraderie, and we would have a good scholarly back and forth about these readings. When I stopped going, not because I got annoyed with them, but because after a while it wasn't worth the money to me. I'd rather be with my family for the weekend. But when I was toward the end of this, I noticed that maybe half the people were now left liberals, and the idea was we're going to engage with them. Now, there's nothing in principle wrong with that.
Right.
But it just occurred to me that if the shoe were on the other foot, they wouldn't say, you know what, let's invite some libertarians in. Let's really hash this out. They don't think of us the way we thought of them as people. And I don't think that's the way they look at us, really.
No. Yeah, I know that I didn't think of you as a person. And I know that we didn't think of you as a right person. And that's why no one ever reached out to you. And that's why I had no interest. I just sort of thought of you as like this exotic curiosity, like there was a giraffe among us or something. Like
Maybe that is the right way to think of it.
How did he get in here?
But yeah, that reminds me of a point that I've been trying to emphasize lately, which is that, today we hear people from various so-called marginalized groups talking about how difficult it is to belong to this group or that group in modern America, or how many ways they're oppressed on college campuses. And I think to myself, if you could walk in my shoes, you wouldn't make it 10 minutes with what I endured. Not 10 minutes.
No way. Speaking of endurance on your part, this is something I've been wanting to ask you about for a long time since I heard you mention it. I think on Isaac Morehouse's show a couple of years ago.
Okay.
Apparently, I want to do the Tom Woods origin story. I want to do the complete Tom Woods origin story here. So apparently there were some bad kids in your earlier history who treated you badly. Your story is basically being treated badly until you became a libertarian.
That's right. So that's why I stayed. I never left. It was the best. And even all the jerks within libertarianism who treat me badly, they have no idea what being treated badly is like. Like Nicholas Sarwark is nothing compared to the kids compared to the kids in fifth grade.
Okay. So let's talk. Was it fifth grade? Was this the moment?
The key thing was sixth grade because our elementary schools went to fifth, and then you go off to another school for sixth grade. So you sort of had to start all over again. Yeah, some of your friends were still there, but they were lost in a sea of kids from 5 other schools. And so, in fact, at the Mises Institute over the summer, I had this informal talk at the end of the day where I actually told this story openly to a group of a lot of people.
Cool.
Where I was more detailed about it than I've ever been, about how petty and nasty the whole experience made me. But cool. It's not impossible to be the nerdy kid and not be abused and made fun of. But in order to do that, you have to take on some outwardly cool persona where you have to pretend not to care about things. You have to pretend not to be interested in anything that matters and just do what everybody else is doing. And I just refused to do that. It was 1984. Yeah, I am interested in whether Reagan or Mondale wins. Sorry that seems nerdy to you, but maybe there'll be a nuclear war if one of them wins and one doesn't. I care about life on Earth. I want to know. So, and in fact, I remember in I forget what grade I was in, but I worked on a state Senate campaign. Now, I wouldn't waste my time doing something like that now, but at that time I thought, well, these things matter to me. Like, I believe in certain things and I'm going to work as a volunteer to try to advance them. And this just seemed like I was from some other planet. So I was not made to feel welcome let's say. And
Huh.
this, even though by high school, things turned around for me, I had such a great time in high school, I didn't want to leave. I still could not let this go. And that has been one of my character flaws, really, to be perfectly blunt with you, is that if somebody wrongs me, it's very hard for me to let it go. I should, and I'm getting better at it, but I just kept wanting to get revenge on these little bastards. And so as years would go by and I would pile up all these accomplishments, I felt like I was sticking it to them in some way, even though I'm not in contact with them anymore.
Yeah.
Like that sort of thing just stick, because it just seems so unjust. I would never dawn on me to abuse anybody else. And yet here I am, the target of all this totally unjustified attack.
Well, what did they
Not
say?
fun.
What did they say to you? I want to know specifics. What did they say or do? Come on, be specific.
It would mostly be, I would say something in class, which would be reasonably intelligent, and then it would just be mocked forever and just repeated as if it's just obviously ridiculous. So, like, for example, in 1983, there was that TV movie, The Day After. You remember that with Jason Robards? It was about what would happen if there really were a nuclear war.
Yeah.
And then the day after, how does life resume and what does it look like? Mm-hmm. And now it was pretty obviously an anti-Reagan movie. We could tell, like, the president was obviously supposed to be Reagan. So I said to the teacher, well, it seems to me like it's pretty obviously a political statement, this movie, even though it is kind of entertaining. And now that's the most obvious, harmless, inoffensive statement you could make. Mm-hmm. But so then everybody else would go up to me and then demand that they didn't understand what the term a political statement meant. They actually thought that it was like a statement in quotation marks. Mm-hmm. And so like they would, all day long, they would be demanding that I make one. Like, what the fuck are you even talking about? Right. But it would be also things about my appearance or, it's just over and over. It's just stuff like that. Like, it was just relentless. Or it would just be that everybody else would be talking, but it was understood that, I'm not part of that because why? Because I excelled in my studies or whatever. Now it could be, I'm not going to say that I'm entirely blameless here. Maybe it got to a point where I had built up such a barrier between myself and other people that I had just become unapproachable at one point. I mean, I don't rule out that I played some role in this, but I will say that if my kids ever treated somebody else's kid the way I was treated, I would talk to them, let's say.
Yeah. I would have bullied you. I'm almost sure of it. I bullied some kids. I did. I don't know. And around that time, it was around 6th, 7th, 8th grade. That was my period of being a bully. I would have been, I'm sure, threatened by your intelligence because I didn't know if I was intelligent at all. I knew my parents. My parents were political. All their friends were political, but I didn't know what the hell they were talking about yet. In 6th grade, certainly not. So I would have taken you to task. I would have made your life miserable. But what? It still seems to sit with you. It still seems to animate you a bit.
Well, telling the story does, but it actually doesn't. It actually doesn't bother me anymore. And
okay. And
I also told the reason for this in my little relating of it recently, and that was I don't know if you know Tom D. But he has a saying: reunions are for losers. Now,
yeah.
I have a funny feeling that's your attitude also.
Yeah.
Am I right?
I don't know about losers. I just don't want to go.
Just don't want to go. Okay, fair enough. But I've gone to every single one.
Wow.
And one of them that I went to, because as I said, I was fine, but there were still some of the same people who would give me a hard time. And I went to one of them and I decided, I'm just going to talk to these people. Like, I mean, it's been years and years at this point, and this will just put an end to it. And I went and did that. And without fail, they were all saying, hey, we've heard you're doing really well and everybody's really proud of you around here. And I thought, well, see, now it's just really hard to really be bitter anymore, right? But then I was standing in the corner talking to another student I hadn't seen in a long time. And he had the same experience I had, very, very unpleasant. But he had never, ever been able to let it go. And I told him, I said, so-and-so's daughter had cancer. And for a year, his life was really, really challenging. And this kid turned to me and said, good. And I thought,
wow,
thank God I didn't go there. That I got out of this and my heart never turned like that. But yeah, I mean, geez. So now, when I've seen my own kids, sometimes I mean, I don't know. Anybody listening to this, were your middle school years fun or were they terrible and awkward, right? I mean, we all had that kind of experience in one way or another with insecurities of one form or another. And when I see my own kids, occasionally having had experiences like this, it really brings it all back to me because I feel like, damn it, am I really going to stand by and let this happen again in the case of my own kid? So anyway, thankfully they all do well. They're well liked and that makes me happy.
Good. Were you in a public school?
I was all public school my whole career. Yep.
Yeah, me too. And where was this?
North Andover, Massachusetts.
Right.
Which is about half an hour from Salem, New Hampshire. So if we had any large purchases, we would drive to New Hampshire and not pay sales tax for it.
Okay. And what kind of a town was that then? Class-wise?
It was North Andover had split off from Andover. So Andover was founded in like 1636, a really, really old town. So I remember the 350th anniversary celebration of the founding of the town in 1986. So it was the classic New England town, the way it was laid out. There was the North Andover Common where we would have our 4th of July events. And there was the Congregational Church and the general store. I mean, it was all beautiful. It recalled the 17th century, really. And there was there's a North Andover Historical Society. There was a real sense of place. And I remember my social studies teacher, who was very much a left liberal, she loved the history of her town, and she just loved it. And we all felt that there was something special that we all belonged to because at least by American standards, this went back a long time. I mean, compared to a European city, it's nothing. But we were some of the first ones, so it's a very charming place. When you're living there as a high school student, you think, this is the most boring place on earth. I can't wait to get out of here. And then you graduate and you think, some losers in my class are probably going to live their lives here. I'll be out in some fancy city. And then at least if you're me, you reach a point in your life where you say, if I had lived there, it wouldn't have been all bad.
Yeah, I love those New England towns. What was the class composition of your schools?
Let's see. Well, in terms of composition, do you mean demographics?
Yeah, I mean, like, was it a working class school, middle class school, upper class school?
Okay, it was probably between middle and upper. Okay. And my family was closer to the lower of that. So I would go to my friends' houses and they would be palaces.
Oh.
And, we had a rather modest house. But the thing is, I never noticed that there was anything. Okay. Our house was perfectly fine, clean, more than adequate. Now I have a pretty large, because I have 5 daughters, but I have a pretty large house. I have my own home office and stuff. And now I would notice the smallness of that house. But at the time, I didn't.
All right. So you weren't embarrassed about that?
No.
Okay, good.
I probably would be now thinking about it, but I didn't know enough to be embarrassed then.
I'm glad you were saved that one pain from childhood. I was embarrassed about my houses being poor for about half my childhood, but all right, let's get into the business here. So I was vaguely aware of you. I met you once at Columbia. You then came out with The Incorrect Guide to American History.
Politically Incorrect Guide to American
Politically
History.
Incorrect Guide, yeah. And kind of made your name there. It was a bestseller, and you already gone at that point from Columbia. So I was aware of it. I don't think I read it. And then I started to make my own turns away from the Citadel, the Cathedral, left liberalism, socialism, Marxism, all that stuff.
Yeah.
So that by 2001, 2, 3, I was definitely looking actively for other ways of thinking and other sources. And I came across Reason magazine in about 2005 or 6, and I thought, if this is libertarians, I can hang out with libertarians. And then I moved to LA and I got deeper into listening to libertarians because I had not studied any economics, and libertarians all are experts in economics. So I figured I would at the very least learn some economics from you all. I don't remember how I heard about your show specifically, but I do know that by 2012, 13, I found it and I began listening to it, and I got hooked. And I think I've told you this before. I listened to every single damn episode, Tom, for I think it was 2 to 3 years.
That's
right around,
amazing.
Right in the middle of the 2010s, I listened to every single episode for more than a couple of years. And I learned, God, I learned a lot from you. I learned a lot. I learned more from you than from Columbia, I think, like from
That's
Columbia
amazing.
professors.
Thank you.
Not more than I learned by myself in the stacks and the library.
Of course. That's how we all learned.
But
that's the secret. That's the dirty secret of these Ivy League schools. You're learning it in the stacks.
Right. But in terms of teachers teaching me, yeah, you and your guests for that 2 or 3 year period, you all have been the best teachers I've ever had. I mean, just in terms of information that I welcomed and that stuck and that I've used and that's changed my mind about a lot of things, it's incomparable what your show's done for me. And I became, people will love to hear this, some people love to hear this, on economics, my positions are identical, I think, to like Ron Paul's or yours. Or If I were a congressperson, my voting record would be, I think, pretty indistinguishable from Ron Paul's. So on public policy, on economics, and on the state, I think not only libertarians, but I think your brand of libertarianism, the Austrian school, Mises wing, you're my go-to. I think you guys are right.
That's great.
About all that stuff. And I told that to Bob Murphy too before we started arguing about God and postmodernism. but on the stuff that you guys and I spend most of our time talking about and caring about, we're on the same page. Public policy, what's in the newspaper, the state economics. Yeah, I defer to you guys. There's just simply some things that I would like for you to supplement your ideas with. And when I say you, I mean just libertarians generally. And that's kind of my thing. But that's not even necessary. Like, I don't even need that because I've learned so much and I've changed so much. But yeah, I've said this before. I'm just going to say it again. Thank you for that. I mean, it's a big deal for me. And I
appreciate that a lot.
Yeah, there's a big chunk of my brain that's because of you. So that was the show. You started that show in what year? What did it start?
2013.
Oh, okay, so that's when I did start. Yeah, it was right when it started, I guess. That's right. I was at the sort of close to the beginning. Yeah. And it's been a daily or 4 or 5 times a week ever since then, basically, right? Which, God damn, man. Like, explain that. Come on. Come on. How do you, I don't get it.
Well, for one thing, it's coming up with topics. I mean, it's not just the time.
I know.
Right?
How do you do it?
I mean, the thing is, current events can bail you out to some degree because there's always something you can talk about. Yeah. But I have this idea of as many of my episodes as possible being evergreen, so that somebody in 30 years could still listen to them, and it won't be about some farm bill that was passing the Congress. No one cares about it anymore.
Right.
So that does make it kind of a challenge. I just felt like from the beginning that the thing that would distinguish me was that I was doing it 5 times a week. And also, there weren't that many. There are a lot more libertarian podcasts now than there were when I started. Mm-hmm. But I still felt like that would be my distinguishing thing. But also, it was because I used to fill in for Peter Schiff when he had actually a terrestrial radio show, the Peter Schiff Show, and that ran 5 days a week. So I was already in this mentality that if you have a show, it has to run 5 days a week. It wasn't like me flexing. I'll show you people. I just, for some reason, it was fixed in my mind that that's how it should be. And what I also liked was, just for SEO purposes, every single day the search engines are being bombarded with more content by Woods. Right. And I felt like that had to be a good thing. I just felt like I can't put my finger on why, but I just know that sticking to this and being reliable and just pushing out this content has to be good for me. And now, like, I look at, and I would worry. I would have a week of shows where I would say every one of these was a home run. It's only downhill from here, right? I mean, there's no way. How can I keep this up? And then, like in the past couple of weeks, I've looked back and said, here I am over 1,700, and they're still good. So I don't know. To me, that's part of I would feel weird if I had a day where I didn't interview somebody now.
Wow.
And then also, I mean, look, Thad, let me be perfectly blunt with you. I was a very, very hard worker for a long time. I mean, I produced a lot of books in record time, and I was traveling around the country, and I was always balancing different things. And I had 12 projects going at once, or I was writing the forward to this book, or writing a speech for somebody, or what. I mean, it was just a lot of work. And now it looks like I do a lot of work, but because on a daily basis, I have an episode of the show, I have an issue of my libertarian newsletter, and then I have a newsletter for people who do like online business and stuff, and I do 1 or 2 of those a day. That's 2 or 3 emails a day that I try to write really crisply, and that might take other people a long time. But because I've been doing it so long, I can bang those out in no time at all. And now the show, even though it's a short show, it's like half an hour, 40 minutes, I still prep. I read the author's book. It takes some time.
I know.
But I'm able to do things so quickly that, like, I can go away for a week, and the previous week I'll just double up. I'll do 10 episodes. And then while I'm away, the episodes just getting released by the people who do the stuff behind the scenes in Tom Woods Inc. And I'm like next week, well, I don't know when we're going to air this. Let's just say at some point, I'm going to Wyoming because I've never been to Wyoming. It'll be the 48th state I've visited. It's the kind of state you can enjoy whether it's closed or open because you're going to be outdoors anyway. And I just want to see it. I just want to go and see it.
Good.
And so I've done all the episodes I need to do for next week. And I have this life now where I can take a week off, not do anything, and everything's fine. But it took so much labor to get to this point. But people look at me and they say, "Boy, you really produce a lot." But it's because I've done it for so long. I can do it really quickly, and I can do it even faster if I have a timer. Like if I just sit there and say I'm going to write an email, it could take me 3 hours. But if I say, "Look, I have to be somewhere in 40 minutes. This thing has to get done in 25." It gets done in 25.
Gosh. Yeah. So I've always wanted to be you. Certainly for the last 3 years 3.5 years since I've been doing my own thing. So I have a podcast and I have an alternative university. You have a podcast and you have an alternative school, Liberty Classroom, and, very much an inspiration for me in starting this business or these twin businesses that I have. And I think I'm still kind of in Vietnam, they called it the shit, combat. I feel like I'm still in that period with the growth of the business, but I'm just dying to get to where you are, or even like halfway.
Well, we should do some kind of joint, why we haven't done some kind of joint promo for both of our platforms.
Let's
we
do it.
Talked about it, and we got to figure out a non-annoying way to set it up and just do it.
It's a natural, because you're basically aiming at like high school, right? Liberty Classroom.
Well, I kind of think of it as like adult enrichment for people who they feel like I got gypped, or even for people who feel like they were goofing off during school and they really do want to know this stuff now. But plenty of high schoolers do use it for sure.
And homeschoolers, a lot of homeschoolers.
Homeschoolers, at that age.
But yeah, yes, so that's my audience. We should definitely do something. But anyway, you worked like a dog creating Liberty Classroom. I know that. I know how many courses you did. It's just insane what you did. And I know you've talked about how much work you put into it while doing your show on a daily basis. Man, it's scary, but now it sounds like you're out of it, and at least you're cruising. You're in cruise control. And is that right? You sort of have the system is in place, and you have your skills locked down. And
yeah, the thing I need to do is just every once in a while I got to do something that consciously builds the audience, because you always have attrition. You got to do something to at least stay where you are. Yeah. If I were more ambitious, I would make more YouTube videos, because that's what I did. A video at the Mises Institute about the lockdowns, and it's had over 800,000 views.
Wow.
And that brought thousands more people onto my mailing list and all that. And it was just one speech I was going to give anyway. But what I'm doing right now, it's that I have a lot of different, I have an expensive household. I have, health issues I have to pay for and stuff like that. So I do need multiple income streams just to keep the lights on around here. And I've just done that. I have Liberty Classroom, and I have the Ron Paul homeschool curriculum. I get royalties from my courses there, and I get affiliate commissions from that. And it's just, various things. I have some advertising revenue on the show. And so if one or two of these things were knocked out, like if my enemies combined and somehow, I don't know how they would, but if they did, they'd knock them out. It would be okay. I wouldn't have the 12 vacations a year emergency fund thing anymore, but I would live okay.
Right.
And that's what I've wanted to work for a long time.
Yeah, it's the same. I have the same basic business model, and it's just about growing each stream. All right, let's talk about libertarianism. It's amazing. We're how long into this interview, and we haven't talked about libertarianism really. Yeah. What? Let's see. So when I came upon it, as I told you, it was about 2006 or 7. I found Reason first, and they were very amenable to me because they're tend to be amenable to bi-coastal elite cosmopolitan ex-leftists. That's what Reason I think is there for. And I still love them. I still work for them mostly. That's who I'm most closely aligned with. But I
have some friends over there. I have friends over there.
I know. Yeah. And there's been a rapprochement recently. I know that.
Yeah, there has. Yeah.
But I got to say, even though I have some issues with the Mises crowd, I think you guys just hold it down intellectually. I think that's still the intellectual core of the whole movement. And if you don't at least take seriously what you guys are doing over there, you're not. I don't see you as a serious libertarian, and I don't, as you know, identify as a libertarian. And I certainly don't identify as a Mises type libertarian. But I have nothing but respect for it. So then I found out I got interested in libertarianism, and I was trying to figure out what is this new world that I'm maybe entering or finding allies in. And so it sort of looks to me this way. There's the Reason folks who I said are sort of the urban, cosmopolitan. They appeal to liberals. They actually have some liberal sensibilities. They like pop culture. They talk about popular culture, unlike most libertarians. They're not just obsessed with economics. That's them. Then there's Cato, which is the Beltway, Washington, D.C. think tank, which from my perspective is, pretty good. Pretty good on things like war. I don't know what you think about their economic stuff. I don't read their stuff on that much.
I don't either.
Good on immigration from my perspective, but they tend to, soften the edges. They're not terribly provocative because they have to write op-eds in the New York Times and the Washington Post and et cetera. And I know that most other libertarians think of them as basically sellouts who are somewhat useful at sometimes. And then there's the Mises crew. I mean, there's others as well, but there's the Mises crew, which is anarcho-capitalist, hardcore, Austrian economics, which you can talk about better than I can. But all of it's radical. I think that you guys are radicals in this country, in this society. You are among the very few radicals around, since the left is no longer radical. What is it about the Mises? And by the way, Lou Rockwell was the first person to interview me for Renegade History of the United States. He was the very first person, which was bizarre because Lou is not interested in the stuff I'm interested in, and so all we talked about was tax policy in the in the colonial era.
You see, I think today you'd have a different discussion with Lou, and that would be interesting. Yeah.
Okay. Cool. Yeah.
But all the same. So what do you want to know?
Yeah. So what is it about how you went to the Mises Institute, which there's a Mises Institute is in Alabama, Auburn, Alabama, and they have a Mises summer program. And I guess you went to that and got turned out. So what is it about their brand of libertarianism that you like so much, that you were attracted to?
Well, I like a lot of different people from a lot of different places. I feel like I have a home at the Mises Institute, partly because on a personal level, I know them well and we get along well, and they just have supported me more than anybody. And, that puts you up pretty high on my list if you support the old man here. Yeah. But also I love their mission. I love the fact that the website has got it's a treasure trove. It's ridiculous what you have access to. The entire print run of important old periodicals, books, courses, lectures. And now they have a graduate program. You can actually get a master's degree in economics through them at this point.
Oh, wow.
So it's, you can't argue with the sheer output of what they've done. They're doing, every year they have a scholarly conference that's very technical. You're not going to get a rah-rah speech about what a great guy Ron Paul was. I mean, this is like cutting edge. How does Austrian economics apply? How do we apply it to the discussion of derivatives or whatever? Things that weren't discussed in the canonical texts? We have to push it forward. This is great. So it's a vibrant thing. They're not resting on the works of dead people. Although as important as those works are, this is a living thing that we're still building on all the time. So that I really like. But yeah, I went there in 93 and 94. And then in 95, I spent the summer there. And then after that, then I would speak at events periodically. And then I actually went to live there from 2006 to 2010. I lived in Auburn and I was a resident scholar. And, they basically, because they trusted me, and they knew I was productive. They more or less let me do what I wanted. Occasionally they'd say, do this, do that. But generally I just pumped out books while I was there. And I had just tremendous, one thing that I liked about it was that over the summer, they would attract students from all over the world for the summer fellowship program, where they would spend the whole summer as graduate students working on some publishable article overseen by the Mises faculty. And then at the end of the summer, they would present their research. And some of these students, a lot of them are professors now. I knew them when they were just, dumb kids or whatever, but now they're accomplished, and it's so fun to look back on. These were the goofs who came over to my house for the parties I used to have, and now look at their distinguished professors all over the place. And the fact that they all would swarm to the Mises Institute was that they knew they were going to get good direction. They weren't, but at the end of that summer, they weren't going to have some fluff paper, on how street gangs are an illustration of supply and demand. I mean, that's a neat op-ed, but I mean, like, I want something I want real economics, not stories, but real economics. And that's what goes on there. But also what I like is it's interdisciplinary. Even though it's the Mises Institute, Mises was an economist, Mises also did history. He wrote a book called Omnipotent Government about the Nazis. He wrote a book called Theory and History. So he was interested in other disciplines because they are related in some way to economics. It's not the same thing, but obviously a knowledge of history is good for an economist to have, in the same way that a knowledge of economics is good for a historian to have. And so at the Mises Austrian Economics Research Conference, they'll have panels on religion, or they'll have a panel on history, and not even necessarily purely economic history, because they feel like it's all, knowledge is, like they're going back to the old definition of philosophy as being the love of wisdom of all kinds, and integrating it all into a grand picture. And I just like that kind of project. Plus, I like Murray Rothbard, and they put him on when I say put him on a pedestal, I don't mean they're not critical of him. Oh my gosh, if you could see how many things Walter Block has written arguing that Rothbard was wrong about X or Y or Z,
Oh, yeah?
But that's, again, it's because it's a living tradition. It's not dead.
Oh.
And so I like all that. I like the excitement of being part of something that's not just looking backward to old glories, but looking ahead to, the brightness of the future.
Yeah, it's almost like it is like the left in the 1960s, right? When the left was kind of reinventing itself and very intellectual, whether you loved it or not, right? Whether you hated it or not, the new left, and by the way, a lot of the new left became canonical for libertarians like Gabriel Kolko and people like that. But, and Ronald Radosh back then. But, it's
back then, he's not good anymore.
No, but his stuff on the New Deal is fantastic though. Yeah. When he was a lefty. But I think I can see that. Yeah, the intellectual ferment and the creativity, and that it's not dead. It's not a dead philosophy like socialism has become, right?
And also, I guess it's the idea that the world makes sense in some way.
Yeah,
there's a way of looking at things that makes sense of it. Like why are these things happening? Why when one institution does this, does it have this social effect? What are the mechanisms by which that happens? And it's not always obvious, but to try to figure that out. I like puzzles. I'm a nerd. I used to assume I was going to be a math major. So sometimes when I have to think about, well, how would a free society handle X or Y without coercion? I think of that as being like a puzzle.
Yeah.
Like a brain teaser. Because I kind of feel like it can't be that voluntary action can solve 98 problems, but not 99 and 100. Like, the evidence all seems to suggest strongly that if I just put my mind to it, there's got to be a way of fixing this last couple of things.
Yeah. Is that you have an apparatus with which to perceive the world and to make sense of it and to fix it with. You have ideas. You're like a mechanic who can't get access to the car.
Right. Exactly. And by the way, one beautiful thing about Austrian economics, which is going to run counter to what a lot of the more hysterical critics of us would think, is how universal it is. I mean, Mises was arguing against a school of thought from Germany from the 19th century that argued that there's no such thing as universal economic law. It's all bound to time and place. Maybe the laws for the Germans are different from the laws for the French or something, because there's something unique about the German psyche or whatever it is.
Right.
They couldn't imagine that there could be regularities in the social order that transcended culture and place. And Mises was arguing against that all these things are secondary, and what's primary are indeed things that transcend time and place. And there is something, I mean, frankly, I like the universalism of that, which is in a way what places me in the tradition of liberalism.
Mm-hmm. I don't like that, but that's okay.
Oh, that's awesome! I love that.
I don't like any.
So you and I have the opposite of what the position people would think we would have.
Probably, I don't like any universalism. It's one of the things I yell at your libertarian friends about.
I know,
because they're always talking about natural rights and human rights, and we need to allow the people in Afghanistan to have their natural rights. And I'm like, once you start talking about natural rights, you're making the same arguments as the neocons and all the imperialists. All they said was natural rights are being denied in Cuba and the Philippines or Iraq and Afghanistan, and we need to go fix that. So we can keep that for another day. But universalism, and I'm gonna segue to another kind of universalism in a second here. But yeah, I am always skeptical of it. I think it's done nothing but harm. One of the things that struck me about the Mises crowd, and libertarians generally, but I think the Mises crowd in particular, is how many Catholics there are over there. And I know that you converted. When did you convert?
1996.
So when you were at Columbia, you got everything done at Columbia.
I did, for good and bad.
So the Mises School also comes from the classical liberal tradition, right? And the classical liberal tradition, part of it teaches what we call the self-regulating individual. So we must regulate ourselves. We must follow a code of ethics pretty strictly. Otherwise, the state will have an excuse, a justification, a rationale to do it for us, to run our own lives, right? And this is what Adam Smith said. This is certainly what John Locke said quite extensively. John Locke was deeply Christian and wrote a lot of his work as a Christian in his development of classical liberalism, which some people think is a contradiction. But I actually think it makes sense, because if you were just an individual in a pure market economy with no state, no government, the argument makes sense that you're going to have to regulate yourself and not just drink a bunch of whiskey or have sex all day. You won't survive. You won't survive unless you're doing some sort of self-regulation. And also, once the government arises, once the state arises, they're going to be looking for misbehavior on your part of all kinds. Simply like you not producing enough, right? Which was Locke's big deal with the Indians. They didn't produce enough. So if you're not productive, according to John Locke and Adam Smith, you actually have to go. Like Lockeans ever since then have argued, those who do not cultivate the land they sit on, those who do not make private property, those who do not make abundance out of the earth, they don't deserve to own it, to even work it. That was key. That was a crucial part of it, of Locke's philosophy. So that's, to me, my guess, and it's just a guess, as to why so many of you all are religious, and religious in particular in that way, which is, Catholicism has a whole bunch of rules. I mean, that's kind of what it's known for. And a hierarchy, and bosses. And by the way, this will confuse you a bit, but I'm also pro-Catholic. If I had to choose one major religion, it would definitely be Catholicism. We can get into that later. It's also a very sensual religion, which is why I like it. It's very sensual, right? But have you thought about this interesting thing that there's a bunch of Catholics and a bunch of religious guys who were on this total pro-freedom anarchist tip over there? Like, is that a coincidence, or is there something connected?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure. Certainly I could imagine somebody who is politically an anarchist thinking that I don't thereby believe that that there shouldn't be any rules, just that they should be voluntarily adopted and they shouldn't be imposed by politicians.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't want to model my life after most of the people who run things in Washington. I wouldn't. I don't think of these people as models in any way.
Mm-hmm.
So to my mind, it has more to do with the idea that there's order to the world. And I know that this may run counter to the way you look at the world, but to think that that things don't accidentally make sense, but that there is an order to the world. And if you have, I've got it somewhere here, but it's off camera, but the Summa Theologiae by Thomas Aquinas.
Yes.
Is this massive work. And
Yes.
each aspect of it is in the form of a question. And then he anticipates objections to the position that he's going to take. He addresses the objections. He lays out his position for every single one of the thousands of questions in there. And by the time he's done, he's built up, just like Rothbard in a different discipline, he's built up an incredible edifice from a foundation of nothing. And there's something that's very both intellectually and spiritually appealing and attractive about that. And then also there's this sense that, and again, I don't know that there's, so in other words, like, I feel like what I just told you about Austrian economics, and it gives me a way of making sense of the world. Well, then I look at something that is so systematic as Thomistic theology. Well, that doesn't make it true, but it makes it something I want to look at for sure. And then also, I do kind of believe in the old view that you hear from Socrates through Plato, that if we are to say something is good, we mean that it performs its function well. So if I have a chair that has only 3 legs, there's no sense in which we would describe that as a good chair, because I can't sit on it. And that's the purpose of a chair. So things have purposes, and the extent to which they fulfill them makes them good. Well, human beings are also things. And so how do we say a human being is good? On what grounds do we say a human being is good? And, I get only one life, and I want to, at the end of it, it's just important to me to be able to say, I lived it well. I lived a good life. So I want to know, what does it mean to lead a good life? And the more I would look at what, the church expects of people, the more it seemed to me to fit like a glove. Like, this is the kind of man I want to be. I don't just want to live arbitrarily or just do whatever, satisfies me in the moment. I want to think for the long haul. What are the sorts of associations, habits, practices that will, in effect, train me to become habituated to doing good things?
Well, so you are clearly highly ambitious and highly disciplined, and always have been. You've been very productive and always moving forward in your career. You did this all by yourself at Columbia, as we've talked about. You were ostracized at Columbia. You may be self-ostracized, but you were all alone, and yet you went through this massive transformation, including converting to Catholicism basically on your own, all in your little apartment. And then you, against all the odds, man, you did this long before I did it. Academia was not going to work for you. And so you left and just made your own damn university, basically. You made your own professorship. And then made it even better than that, because your audience is about 1,000 or 1,000,000 times bigger than it would have been if you were a professor. Not to mention your books and all that. So that, I know, because I do something very similar, took a massive amount of work. I'm wondering if you felt like you needed some external structure or force to keep you on that track. Because I could totally understand that. I could sympathize with that. Is that part of why Catholicism was appealing? No?
I think a lot of people think that, and I think for some people that may be it. The criticism comes in the form of, you religious people, you need a crutch, but I'm sophisticated and I can do it all on my own.
Right.
So I know I've heard that kind of thing, but for me, it was always more on is this true or not? Like the first time I even gave Christianity a second thought was in college. Never even gave it a second thought before. I mean, I'd been baptized, but I think mostly for cultural reasons. I didn't know what it meant to be a Congregationalist. I had no idea whatsoever. And then I went to college, and a guy who's now on the Council on Foreign Relations, which is a different matter altogether.
There you go.
So you see the sinister woods is
that's
on
it.
All sides.
You're working for them, buddy. I knew it.
Yeah,
you're working for them. I know.
But he took me aside and asked me, because I worked on like the conservative magazine when I was there. And so he took me aside and asked me if I believed that there was such a thing as truth. Now, I didn't have the blow his mind Thaddeus Russell answer to that question. So I said, yeah, sure, of course I believe there's truth. And so then what he did was he gave me a book called "Did Jesus Rise from the Dead?" And it was the text of a debate, an Oxford debate between Gary Habermas, a Christian, and Antony Flew. And you'll know that name. At that time, he was probably the best known atheist in the world. And then toward the time of his death, he became a theist, although not a Christian. But anyway, and they debated this as a matter of fact. And a panel of judges was going to decide who was the winner. And when it turned out that 3 out of the 5 judges said Habermas was the winner, I thought, well, how can that be? You can't prove that. How could you persuade anybody of something ridiculous like that?
Right.
So that just made me think, all right, well, wait a minute. Maybe religion isn't just something for stupid rubes who need a crutch. Maybe I need to look into this. And then as time went on and I became acquainted with, let's say, more sophisticated arguments, like there's a guy that I like very much named Ed Feser, F-E-S-E-R.
Mhm.
And Feser was a Catholic who fell away, but he's a philosopher. And so as part of his work, he was examining the arguments for the existence of God, some of the classical arguments. And the customary modern view is that, oh, these are all refuted or none of them work. And so that's what he expected to find. And he went through them with no axe to grind. He has no dog in this hunt. And he looked at them and he said, actually, every one of them works. They just need to be restated a bit for modern ears, but every one of them works. And that converted him. Like he went from there. Now most of these arguments can make you believe in God. To make you believe in Catholicism is a separate matter. Regardless, that's where he felt compelled to go after that. And so I felt like, I think that a lot of this is like material that it's like Paul Krugman talking about Austrian economics. A lot of libertarians talking about religion because they think they know it already. Like I already know that it's like Krugman with Austrian economics. I already know that anybody saying this must be an idiot, so it's not worth my time.
Mhm.
But it is kind of worth your time because if you read Ed Feser or any of his books on this sort of thing, you're going to come across a guy who is pretty smart. And of course, all he's doing is repeating the arguments of people who are even smarter. It's at least worth thinking about it. And so it wasn't so much that I had some mystical experience. And so then I have this ineffable sense of God. I have had experiences where I've felt that way, but I don't base my faith on that. And I think there are a lot of people, some of them in Catholicism, some of them in Protestantism, who do base their faith on a kind of a feeling of God's presence. But what if you don't have that feeling? Does that mean your faith is gone? I think it has to have a more fundamental basis. Anyway, I think I'm off topic entirely, but at least I made that point.
No. I get. Yeah. So you wanted to know if you're a good person, and you decided to use the standards of Catholicism to judge that.
They appeal to me. They seemed to be the kinds of things that maybe you don't want to live up to, but in the back of your mind, you kind of know you should.
Yeah. So you introduced me to a lot of exotic stuff I had never even known about before. One of them was Austrian economics, another was libertarianism, and a third was Catholicism, but a particular. What do you call it? Tradition? What do you call do you call it traditional Catholicism, or what's the term?
Yeah.
What's the cool term?
Yeah. Now
Orthodox, not Orthodox, but
traditionalist.
Yeah, traditionalist.
And like all subgroups, there's a lot of infighting. I like the old Latin Mass. Even if you took the new Mass that they changed it into and you translated it into, or you use the Latin version, that's not what I want. I want the old Latin Mass before they thought they could make it better. In that apex of civilization, the late 1960s, where aesthetics were at their height, that's when we're going to make it better. Yeah. I'm not convinced that they made it better. So I like the old Latin Mass.
I don't.
So just go ahead.
I just think the traditionalist argument is unassailable. Like I don't get it. You're not. It's not Catholicism anymore. I mean, especially under Pope Francis. Like what the hell, man? Like
this is insanity.
If you turn, whether you hate the religion or not, if you turn it upside down, denude it of the bulk of its components, it's no longer that. I married a Jewish woman many years ago, and we got married in the second oldest synagogue in the United States in Savannah, Georgia, and it was a Reform congregation, Reform synagogue, and the rabbi was like, "Oh, it doesn't matter which side you stand on. Oh, you don't need to step on a glass. You don't need to do this, that, or the ring, whatever. We don't care."
Yeah.
And I'm like, can we do this in Japanese too? Like what? Is this is no longer
Right.
Judaism, guys.
Right.
I'm happy to be here. This is great that you have fewer rules because I'm not, I'm only a quarter Jewish and certainly never religious, so I don't care. But this is obviously a sham. This is a farce. This is not Judaism. And I think the same thing about Catholicism and where it's gone.
Yeah. Thank you. All right. Yeah. Let me check. Okay.
It's not.
I think this is how a lot of people who are outside the church would believe. They would say, look, when I'm in a Catholic church, I expect Catholicism.
Right.
It doesn't have to cater to me.
Right.
Right. I don't want that.
Right.
And like when you go to the movies and they want to show you the inside of a church, they don't show one of these modern churches built in 1977 that looks like the inside of an insane asylum.
Right.
They show an 150-year-old church with a high altar.
Which is beautiful.
Because that's what people expect.
Yeah.
And so then what you have on the so-called Catholic right is you have conservatives who are just conserving the latest innovation. And they'll say, oh, look, we still have the 7 sacraments. We still have all these things about Catholicism. It's just the outward forms that have changed, as if these things are just mere afterthoughts, and to treat them so cavalierly, like, sure, we had that for thousands of years, but that's like 20 minutes ago. Now we have. And then also there's the fact that I defy Pope Francis to explain to me what we need the Catholic Church for.
Ooh.
I mean, we already have spokesmen for left liberal political causes. We have that already.
Right.
We already have social service agencies. We have that already.
Schools.
And we have concert halls, and we have, whatever. What's left? What's the urgency? Why do I? Because according to him, it almost seems like it doesn't really matter. You should just, if you're Jewish, be a good Jew. And if you're a Muslim, be a good Muslim. And if you're an atheist, just be the best atheist you can be. Okay, that's a very sweet thing to say. What's the point of, why don't you just take those clothes off, put on a business suit and go do something productive?
That's right. I'm completely with the traditionalists.
Yeah, in fact, when I was at Harvard, my undergraduate advisor said to me, because we were very good friends, and I would go to his office, we would talk all the time. Now I realize, having been a professor myself, and my office hours were like, since no one came, I could get so much done. I was wasting this poor guy's time so much, but I was sitting there. I remember telling him about traditional Catholicism. I was getting interested in it, and this must have been, I stayed friends with him years later, so I got in contact with him years later after I'd converted, and I told him that I was kind of interested in traditional Latin Mass Catholicism, and he said, as an atheist who had no interest in it, he said, if I were going to be a Catholic, I would either be a traditional Latin Mass Catholic or no Catholic at all.
At all. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I don't get it. Yeah. Like with Jews, it's like you're going to be kosher or you're not Jewish. I'm sorry. That's the way it works. Like the Hasidim are the Jews. They're the real Jews. You're not. Like the Reformed Jews with the lesbian rabbi, you're not real Jews. I'm sorry. Like that was invented 5 minutes ago. That is not the religion. This is a very old religion, as is Catholicism. 2,000 years is not something to sneeze at. The taking away the aesthetics, the aesthetic qualities of the Catholic Church is the greatest crime in the history of humanity. I mean, how much beauty, whether again you despise the teachings, right? Whether you think the Bible is nonsense, come on, go to a cathedral in Europe and tell me it's not the most beautiful human-made thing you've ever seen.
Yeah,
that's it.
It's
period.
Yeah,
my mother, who's like a lifelong Marxist atheist, has said that. Like it's obvious. And then just normal, regular old Catholic churches in, somewhere in Rhode Island or whatever, like they're more beautiful than other churches. The incense, the music, the language, the robes, the wine, that's where the Protestants went wrong. They made Christianity no fun. Right. And so,
well, let me tell you just a quick thing about the Pope who was responsible for this, who has since been canonized. So he's now Pope St. Paul VI. The consolation of this, because when you're declared a saint, it means that we have moral certainty that you're in heaven.
Yeah.
The consolation of this is apparently it's much easier to get into heaven than we thought. Right? That's the way I console myself over the canonization of Paul VI. But he was the one who introduced, most of these changes that ordinary people experience in their normal parish life. And some people objected and argued that he shouldn't do this, and people said, but he has the right to do it. And the answer was, whether or not he has the right to do it, we're not sure he does. He probably also has the right to tear down all the cathedrals of Europe. But so there was a petition of both Catholics and I think it was mostly non-Catholics sent to Paul VI, urging him not to do this, or at the very least to preserve the Old Latin Mass as an alternative, because it was the foundation of What, I mean, how many mass settings were written by Beethoven, Mozart, the great, all these greats? I mean, requiems meant for the old Latin Mass. You can't do this, so you've got to preserve it. Agatha Christie's name was on that petition.
Wow.
And the story goes, and by the way, I believe this because of what a frivolous man he was. I believe this story is true. Paul VI was shown this petition of intellectuals in Europe, and he sees Agatha Christie's name. He loves Agatha Christie. So he decided that England and Wales could have a limited option for the old Latin Mass. And it became known as the Agatha Christie Indult, special permission, because this thing Agatha Christie signed. And then John Paul II expanded that to the whole world, but you had to ask your bishop for it. Your bishop was trained to believe that the old Latin Mass, is like voodoo or something, so he's not going to give it to you. And then anyway, you can. This is not a general rule, but sometimes it works. If the media hates somebody, that person's at least worth looking into. The person may be bad after all, but he's at least worth looking into. So they all hated Pope Benedict XVI, which means he's the best pope in our lifetimes. And he said, you don't have to ask your bishop. What? And he basically said, what kind of a weird dystopia is this? He said, we just got done telling you this is the most sacred thing we have. And then 10 minutes later, we say, if you long for this, there's something mentally wrong with you. I mean, he basically said that in a letter to the bishops. He said, this is not the way the church operates. We don't act this way. If this was a great treasure 50 years ago, then guess what? It's still a great treasure, and you're going to let people have it. Now, he had no constituency for this. There were no bishops asking for this. He expended all this capital for the tiny, tiny sliver of us who wanted it. He did that for us, even though he didn't have to. He could have spared himself a lot of grief. So that's why I still respect him. He didn't have to do that. He did it because it was right.
Okay. Jesus, it sounds like Luther and Calvin during the Reformation, what they were saying about the church, right? I mean, that's indulgences. That's what your guy did. I mean, this is not the only time the Catholic Church has been accused of corruption. I was saying you introduced me to a lot of exotic ideas about economics and the state, which I love. You also introduced me to very exotic set of ideas, traditional Catholicism, through in particular one of your guests who I adore, and I can't wait to get him on the show. I don't know if he'll do it. Anthony Easelin.
Oh, he would do it. Yeah,
he is.
I mean,
he's amazing.
He's a brilliant guy. Yeah. I mean, so he did a tremendous translation of Dante, the Divine Comedy.
I know.
But he's also an author of other things and other things. And he's a Catholic he's probably a Latin Mass guy, but I don't know that for sure.
Got to be.
But he's nevertheless somebody who would disagree with me on economics because he would feel like Catholicism demands a different kind of economics. But on my show, he said, but I'll be honest with you, I haven't really studied it. And I said, yeah. And and even if you did, you're the sort of person that you and I could just hash this out calmly without calling the other one names, without excommunicating each other. We could just hash this out because we're just both normal people. So he's exactly the kind of opponent I'd like to have.
So what's the trad Catholic journal that's super intellectual? Is it it's not Criterion. Crisis? That he writes for.
Well, they used to have Crisis. I don't know if it's still around. And it wasn't. It was what I call conservative Catholic. So they would think you were kind of odd to be worried about the liturgy. What matters is moral teaching. Okay, but it's encased in the liturgy. Like the whole package.
So I read several of Anthony Easelin's articles, I believe, in that journal, and they are so darkly beautiful. First of all, I mean the writing. Everyone, I just strongly recommend, right? Again, the aesthetics of the church are taken seriously, and I take that seriously. I love it for that. But there's a real darkness and a real beauty to his writing. But what he does is, at least in what I read, he describes the immoral, debauched, decadent products of capitalism as ruining our society, right? And as bringing the church down with it. Right. And so this is another contradiction I would imagine you have to wrestle with, right? The market produces, as you know, a lot of stuff which runs directly counter to the teachings of almost any church. The market appeals to whatever sells, and often that's sex, and sometimes it's booze, and sometimes it's wine, and sometimes it's pornography, and sometimes it's, prostitution. So he's right, I think, about that. It's just that he chooses not to like those things, and I choose to like those things, or most of them. But I think the argument's very powerful that the market and Catholicism and most religions that have that ascetic element to them, ascetic, not aesthetic.
Right.
There's a problem there, isn't there? Isn't there a contradiction you got to work out? I mean, that's why I was really surprised when I found out that Lou Rockwell was a Catholic and that you were a Catholic, because the economic doctrines you are preaching and have been preaching fervently have given us Kim Kardashian's ass, along with a lot of steel production, right? I mean, it's not, I mean, the market capitalism produces a lot of unsavory things, a lot of irreligious, very non-Catholic things, right? How do you deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, on the other hand, it makes the Bible the best-selling book in the world. I mean, it has good and it has bad, right. But I don't think of it as a system that I'm advocating. I think of it as a lack of a system.
Okay.
I mean, now maybe that's naive, because obviously there are some preconditions for capitalism. There has to be respect for private property and all that. But in other words, there's no central plan to it. I hear this objection. I understand, and I'm to some degree I'm somewhat sympathetic to it. But the best way that I can address people who are coming at me from that perspective is that the same instrument they want to use, they think that, well, we'll just use this to ban Kim Kardashian, but I'm sure this won't ever hit us in the rear end. It's just her,
right?
I don't see how that's sustainable. And secondly, people who are, who are the sorts of people who really flourish in the modern state? Are they people who are held back by the moral constraints of Catholicism? Or are they people who are ruthless, who will do whatever they want to advance their interests? Is this the playing field we want to try to compete on? And say, well, we'll just get hold of it and then we'll use it. Yeah, okay, great. And then when that happened in the past, when there was more of a friendly relationship between church and state, that wound up with the state authorities naming all the Catholic bishops, to the point where for decades, like up into the 11th century and beyond, people were wondering, why can we not get a handle on the corruption problem in the church? Because the state authorities were naming all the personnel. I mean, if you can't even control that, then probably you're going to have trouble reforming anything. So I don't believe that there's some golden age that we ought to think back to. If human beings want things that are bad, then it's up to you to do a better job of promoting things that are good. I would say the church has done a terrible job of saying why there's something beautiful about itself. They have YouTube, they have every social media outlet available to them, and I see nothing. They're not even competing. They're not on the playing field at all, saying, well, you could have Kim Kardashian, or maybe you could have something that is a little more lasting and more spiritually satisfying, or whatever. I don't even see them doing it. They're trying. So, you have to do it on the basis of making the strongest case you can make. If you're really going to say in the 21st century that the way we're going to prosper is simply by eliminating people's choices, and then they'll have no choice but to come to us because we'll be the only choice left, I don't think people are going to find that persuasive. And in the long run, if you want people to follow you, you can't just do it through brute force, because as soon as you let go, they're going to leave.
Okay. Yeah, do you consider yourself a social conservative? I do.
I guess so.
I consider you to be a social conservative.
Yeah, but I mean, in a way, though, it kind of does. I don't want to sound like Bill Clinton, but in this case, it does depend on what the term means, because I don't think of myself as being like, if I were in a room if I were at a Mike Huckabee rally, I would want to jump off a cliff. These people would make me crazy. But I guess I'd be a social conservative in that, in my own life, in the sorts of things that I choose and the things that I like, I prefer aesthetically, they tend to be old timey, and I guess they tend to be on the square end of things, in my personal life. But I don't think of myself as I just think the state is such a terrible instrument that even if I didn't believe in natural rights, I just would never. I would think it was extremely short-sighted to use the state to make everybody act like Tom Woods.
Cool.
I just can't imagine that having a happy ending.
Good. That's why we're friends, Tom, and not shooting, not shooting at each other. So I have spies, and I know you have spies too, right? And so I was told, this was maybe a year ago. I had just been on your show. And we talked about my show, and I mentioned it, and I just mentioned it. I didn't even talk about it. I just mentioned.
Oh, no. Did one of my people say something?
No, you did.
Oh, what did I say?
It's okay. It's all good. It's totally good. It was actually really sweet in a way.
Right.
And I just mentioned in passing, I didn't get into it. I just said, and I have sex workers on my show too as guests. That was it. Just like it was like a clause in a sentence. Okay.
Okay.
And the rest of the hour and a half we talked was about other things. Okay.
Okay.
And then about like a month or two later, maybe something like that, you were on someone else's podcast. I forget whose it was. And they asked you, so what's the most memorable moments in your podcast? You've had like 1,000, whatever it was, episodes so far.
That was it.
And you immediately said, oh, well, it actually just happened recently. I had this guy, Thaddeus Russell. Yeah. I had this guy, Thaddeus Russell, on my show, and he has sex workers on his show. Prostitutes. And that was the most amazing thing ever that happened on my show, that he said this on my show. And you said,
certainly not true.
Yeah, it is. Yes, it is. I'll find it for you.
No, I'm sure I said it, but I'm saying that can't be the most extraordinary thing on the show.
There's
no way that's possible.
Because I didn't even get into the issue. I just mentioned it. But I was like, damn. I was like, Jesus Christ, Tom, you are really sensitive to this stuff.
That is so funny. No, actually, when people have asked me about memorable moments on the show, it's hard for me to remember because there's so many that it's like one big blob, and it's hard. There's no like filing cabinet, and it's hard to do that. But I often mention that one of my favorite moments was I had Pat Buchanan on, and he was promoting his book. He had written a book on Nixon, and because he was in the Nixon White House, and he wrote some of Nixon's speeches, and he was in there when they were making Vietnam policy. And I just thought, sometimes I treat Pat with kid gloves, and that's not interesting. Let's really get into it. Yeah. So I his career is kind of caught up in the Vietnam War to some degree. And so, of course, he believes that it was a just cause. And, if only we had done this and that, we could have won it. And so I said, Pat, from your own point of view, don't you see that the war was bad from a social conservative point of view? I mean, the anti-war movement, that the counterculture, a lot of that developed as a result of, which you were against, as a result of opposition to the war. And then the war cost a huge amount of money, which created a tremendous dislocation, not conservative for people. And then the communists won, and it turned out nothing happened. Like we were fine. Nothing. There was no problem.
Right.
And so all those men died, all these heads of households. So you've thrown all those families into disarray. Couldn't you say that maybe, even in light of your own standpoint, maybe it would have been better just not to intervene? And I came this close to him admitting that.
Wow.
And I thought, okay, you're not going to get Richard Nixon or Pat Buchanan to say the Vietnam War was a mistake, but you can come right up to the edge, and I did that.
Nice.
So so that and Thaddeus Russell with sex, those two.
That's a great story about Pat Buchanan. I guess I didn't know that he was still pro-Vietnam because he's such an anti-war guy. He's so good on war. But he's bad on the worst war. Like,
well, the thing is, I'm sure he's still pro-Nixon, even though he's better now than he was then, just because of, it's very, very hard for something that you invested so much of your life in to turn around and say, no, that's not right.
Yeah. Back to the personal, although we'll make this political too. You did another just bizarre thing to me. Again, you're like a giraffe. You're an exotic animal at a zoo that I just go see every once in a while. Like, how did that happen? How does this person do this? And I say this like probably once a month. I say, and Tom has 5 kids. to somebody in my life. I say, and he has 5 kids, because we talk about you a lot over here in my business, because you're a model and because we share some personnel too. But what possessed you? I'm just going to be brutal here. What possessed you? I'm sure you've had other people be this brutal to you. I have a kid, but only one. And I was going to have 3. I was sure I was going to have 3 until he came out. And I was like, nope, I'm good. This is plenty of work. I'm fine now.
Yep.
I was so exhausted by 1.
Yeah.
You have 5. Talk me through that. When did that start? Why did you do it? Why did you continue? I met Sarah recently, just now. She's adorable.
Yeah.
So now I can understand it a little bit better now that I see how adorable Sarah is.
Well, they range in age right now from 6 to 17.
Good Lord.
The 5 of them, they're all girls.
Good Lord.
And the answer to the question is, in a way, I mean, I'll give you a not as facetious answer in a minute, but if you meet them, you just know that there isn't one of them that I could live without.
Wow.
And there's a video of, I did a special live in-person event in Orlando for my 1000th podcast episode.
Mm-hmm.
And at that episode, we did a roast of me.
Mm-hmm.
And unbeknownst to me, my kids Sarah was too young at that time, but the 4 who were old enough had written their own jokes for that roast. And they were going to surprise me by participating in the roast. And they did. They showed up on stage. And there's a video of this on YouTube where there's one video, it's the whole 1000th episode event. But then there's a video where it's just the daughters roasting me. And like if you just type in Wood's daughters roast, it'll come up. Yeah. And they're just brilliant. And they're devastating. Like they are just crushing me in this roast. It is so beautiful. And because you know how Bob Murphy and I went on Contra Krugman, we used to joke about the fact that I don't have an economics degree.
Right.
And so, but yet here I am commenting on economics. And so he would joke about that, that he's the economist and I'm the guy who reads about it in his spare time. So one of my daughters said, I guess my dad must need a hearing aid. Every time I ask him where he earned his credentials in economics, he can't seem to hear me. Like, oh gosh, like right through my heart, right? Yeah. And then little Elizabeth was only 7 years old at the time. Here she is looking out to a crowd of almost 600 people. And she's terrified. She delivers these jokes perfectly. So her jokes are like, when my dad starts the day, he doesn't need a hairbrush because he has no hair. Or Dad can't go as fast as he likes in his new BMW because he can't fully reach the pedal. I'm just roasting, right? Or how about this? The other day I was playing a game with them. It's one of these Jackbox games, where they have Quiplash and You Don't Know Jack and whatever. So they have this one game about coming up with patents for inventions. And the idea is in the game, you come up with some problem that needs to be solved, and then you devise an invention to solve that problem, and then you have to pitch your invention to the other people. So the problem that somehow we came up with, it doesn't really work for an invention game, but it's just a game. The problem was I'd like to meet one of the original Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz. So my invention was called the Death Reverser. And the tagline for the invention was, remember kids, all the original Munchkins from The Wizard of Oz are dead now. So if you're going to meet one, you need the Death Reverser. Right? I thought this was the cleverest thing in the world. So anyway, so one of my daughters was not playing that game with us. So later on, I said to her, Elizabeth, Veronica thought that was hysterical. And at that very moment, Elizabeth walks in and says, you're still alive. I thought, man, she's 10 and she can still roast me. She's so great. So it's just like what I've loved about, yes, it is work. It's true. But to me, the thing that I love the most about it is, a few things, but one is sharing things that are meaningful to me with them for the very first time, like a song that means the world to me. And they hear it for the very first time and I'm sitting there with them while that's happening, or we see a movie for the very first time. There's one of the most underrated Robin Williams movies is called Awakenings with Robert De Niro. Mm-hmm. And he's dealing with people who are basically catatonic, but he's playing a doctor who figures out a way to, in effect, wake them back up again. Mm-hmm. And one of my daughters was like she was so moved by this. The experiences of these people, these parents getting to see children who have been gone to them for 20 years, see them again, to see her emotional about something that's emotional to me. There's nothing like it. There's absolutely nothing like it. But then also to watch them develop into people who are unlike me. They're not carbon copies of me. They more or less have the same kind of overall views that I do, but I don't hound them about that. Yeah. Just to watch them develop, watch their good qualities, they have talents that I don't have. Most of them are artistic and I'm not artistic at all. And just to observe that and to be able to have real conversations with somebody who didn't exist before. And now you're having a high level conversation with them. There's not one of them that I could live without. And I know you would say, but gee, what made you have the decision to make another one that you hadn't met yet? I mean, maybe once you meet them, you'll say, in retrospect, I'm glad they're here.
Yeah.
I don't know. It was a kind of a confidence and a trust that it would work, that it would work. You know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. It's worked so far. And now, and basically they're best of friends too. The first three we had 3 under 3. We had 3 in diapers simultaneously. And that was a challenge. I remember one time we were both sick on the couch with I don't know what, and the kids are running around. We're too exhausted to get up and do anything about it. We had no one to help us. It was hard at times, but now they're all close in age. They're best of friends.
Wow.
And it's been I can't imagine my life any other way, really. So I'm not sure I can fully answer your question other than with these anecdotes and impressions.
No, you very much just did. That was beautiful, and you should have 5 children.
Thank you.
You should have 5 children. No, that was beautiful. I have nothing to say to that, except that I can add on to it because I have similar experiences. My son is 18, he's about to turn 19, and for the last 3 or 4 years, his intellect has emerged. And we've gone into it like this, and we talk like we're best friends now, and it is priceless. And I know, and also, I like to see that he pushes back at me. He's not indoctrinated. I did a really good job, I think, of not indoctrinating him, of really like trying to keep my politics away from him. But he came to them, obviously, saw his dad doing his thing, and he just sort of gravitated. But he pokes me. He's a big Ben Shapiro fan, so
all right.
He's got like
to talk about.
He's got a right-wing streak in him that I'm working on, but but it's fun. It's great. I tell him, I think that's great, Toby, because I want to hear things that are different than me. I don't want to just hear a puppet talking back, a parrot.
Right.
So that's great. I love that. Let's talk about politics real quick, and I'll let you go because you have an appointment or something, right? Okay.
I do, yeah.
So a couple things. Let's just do the election. Let's do COVID. It's all comedy in a way. Like what... What's your overall take on what's going on with the election? Like, what do you think?
This is the most inane election I've ever experienced.
It's incomprehensible. Yeah.
But it's impossible to separate COVID from it.
Right.
Because when I think about, I'm looking around the world and I'm seeing in Britain they're locking down again. In Israel they're locking down again.
Mm-hmm.
I've talked to. On my show, I have Martin Kulldorff on my show from Harvard Medical School, who actually is an expert in infectious disease outbreaks, and he says that lockdowns are just a completely idiotic approach, and it doesn't matter. The politicians just want to do it for one reason or another, and it seems to me that Biden is in the tank for that way of thinking. If the scientists tell me to lock the country down, I'll do it. But you know what? It's not the scientists; it's the ones you want to listen to, because I can find you a ton of scientists. So I'm worried. If Biden wins, he's going to listen to the lockdown crowd, and people have been terrified into thinking that is the correct approach. Even though we're living life as pretty much normal in Florida, almost normal, and we had this spike, and it came down without any lockdowns of any kind. It just came down. It just as it does everywhere. It came down, and we just continued living our lives. And some people look at that and say, we need lockdowns. I don't know what you're talking about. But whatever this is, it ain't science. It's some kind of a sick cult or something. And I think the best thing Trump has done, usually Trump's best things are the reversals of his earlier bad things.
Right.
So like getting rid of John Bolton was terrific.
Great idea.
Why did he bring on John Bolton?
Right.
Well, likewise, sidelining Dr. Fauci was great with Scott Atlas. But I'm sorry Dr. Fauci was in the saddle to start with. So. And it was fun to have Martin Kulldorff on the show and ask him his opinion on Dr. Fauci. Because I know that's a third rail question. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to. He was very diplomatic, but he was basically saying, Dr. Fauci is very good when it comes to immunology and stuff. And if you have questions about that, you should ask him those questions.
Oh.
However, there are other things at play here that maybe no one person could possibly be an expert on all of them and whatever. So it's we all got the gist of what he was driving at there. But I fear that if Biden wins, then all the states that lock down get bailed out. Yes. And so therefore they get encouraged to lock down further. They get rewarded for bad behavior. And if Trump gets back in, to me, the urgent issue in the country is opening up. Everything else is secondary to me right now.
Yep.
Me too.
And I feel like Trump would keep the place open. He would do a lot of dumb things. He would lecture us about masks, maybe. He would say that Sweden made a mistake by not locking down. I don't even care. He put Scott Atlas in front of the country. And Atlas the other day just absolutely pummeled the media. Pummeled them. And they tried coming at him, and he just bashed him over the head. So Trump's better on that. And I know I can already hear all the people who make careers out of not liking Tom Woods. Oh, Tom Woods likes Trump. Okay. So that's the IQ level that they're at. What I am saying cannot be denied.
He's better on this.
When it comes down to the lockdowns,
better.
Trump, his problem was he listened to them too much, not too little.
Yeah.
And on this, he would be better. And there are some, I get to live pretty freely, but there are some states where people are still locked in their houses. Yeah. Look at you. Look at the kind of life that you have to live. It is ridiculous. And that will continue and intensify and be spread to other states under a Biden. So that's the way I look at the election.
The San Francisco Bay Area, where I am, we have been locked down, Tom, since March without a break. Without a break. We just one of our counties here just entered phase 2 out of 4.
Yeah.
Out of 4. And 4 is not even a total reopening. Gavin Newsom is out of control.
But why are his poll figures so good?
Because liberals love it. Because if you work in tech, you work at home. If you're highly educated, you probably have a job where you work at home and you have enough money where the lockdown hasn't affected you. This is a very, very wealthy area. The very rich are fine, basically. They might have taken a bit of a hit on their portfolios, but they're fine. And the armies of working class people who surround the Bay Area, who have to commute in because of this terrible housing policies here, they don't have a voice. They're not heard. You know who's not heard? Is the small business owners. And it's the small business owners who are completely on our side. They understand this. They know it. They have been rebelling. They've been opening in secret. They've been opening black market operations, etc. They've been complaining. But there's very few small business owners in our society, unfortunately, right? Most people are employees of larger corporations or not something like that, or work for the government.
Yeah.
And this is really fascinating. I don't know if you've done a show on this. I've thought about trying to figure this out in a really rigorous way. Like, it obviously tracks perfectly. The more left or liberal you are, the more likely you are to support the lockdowns and masking, right? It's like it's 1-to-1 correspondence there. So we're full of liberals here. I think they like the appearance of unity. So when everyone wears a mask, it's more equal looking. I think it's an egalitarian aesthetic. There you go.
I never thought of that. Yeah.
Neither had I until that moment, but that's what it is. I've heard it called white Sharia. But if you like uniformity, if you like uniforms, right? And progressives have always liked uniforms. They want a national service program where people wear uniforms instead of go to the army, right? But you're going to like the mask. Deferring to scientific experts is also primary in their values. And obedience to government. The government told us to do this, and those of us who call into question the government, especially the handsome, dashing, highly educated, articulate governor we have, you've got to have something wrong with you, I guess. But it's I love your take. You and I have had the same take. You and I are like we were just talking about this before we started airing. A lot of libertarians are not on our side on this. I don't know. I don't get it. Like, I've never understood. It makes no sense to me. We know exactly the demographic populations that are vulnerable.
Right. Exactly.
You protect those people. You wear masks around your 8-year-old grandmother with diabetes. You respect their needs to be quarantined, and everyone else should be free because no one else is dying from it. It's simple.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Well, and I even asked Koldorf about that. I know that is the correct approach, but even the old people are still people, and some of them are isolated in facilities to the point where they haven't had human contact in forever.
Ugh.
And then they're going to die without getting to see their families again. Surely there has to be a less crude way, because that's also inhumane. And can't they make a decision? Look, I'm 87. I'm probably dying.
Mm-hmm.
You're not going to, I have to see my grandkid over Zoom because science says so?
Right.
How does science can't decide what my values are.
Right.
And I value human contact, you know? So anyway, there are people out there who are sane,
Mm-hmm.
but and I just thought there would be more of them by now, especially now that we can see clearly the thing is manageable. We know that the hospitals are not overwhelmed, quite the contrary. 1.6% of people going to emergency rooms now are reporting a COVID-like illness, a CLI. Right. 1.6%. It is quite manageable. And no matter what you do, no matter what you implement, the chart looks the same. It looks the same everywhere in California. It looks the same as in Florida.
It's just a camel's hump in every case. It's a camel's hump.
And then there might be a second one, and then even that one goes down.
Tiny. So it'll be tiny. Yeah.
I thought by now there'd be more resistance. But
I
long live Van Morrison. Van Morrison just wrote 3 protest songs. And good for him.
I know. Yeah. I can't wait to listen to them. Even if they're bad music, I'm going to blast them out of my car everywhere I go.
Damn right. Yes.
Last thing, I'm going to float a conspiracy theory by you that I've been floating for a few months. And when I first did it on Twitter, I thought, I've gone too far and I'm going to lose some fans and people are not going to take me seriously. I said, look, it's in the Democrats' interest. I'm not saying that they sat down on the phone and planned this out, but is it not in the Democrats' interest to prolong the lockdowns, to further immiserate the people? Because they know that in times of economic and social crises, the incumbent suffers and usually loses. Don't you think this is why the Democratic governors are pushing it hard?
Well, look, I mean, these are people who believe in a narrative according to which we're being ruled by crypto-fascists who are in cahoots with the Russians. I mean, I don't know if they actually believe that in their heart of hearts. Their followers believe it. Maybe they're smart enough not to. But if you buy into that, is there anything you wouldn't do to try to put a lid on that? So I can't rule that out. And especially when we see governor after governor, then Nancy Pelosi going to get her hair done, they're not worried about it. They personally are in the demographic that's at risk, and they're not even worried about it based on their own conduct.
That's right. That's right. All right, my friend, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for doing this. I've been wanting to do this with you for a long time. You're my hero, Tom, and you're my teacher, one of my great teachers. And thank you so much for teaching me all these things and changing my life, man. You did.
I appreciate that. And you, little by little, that renegade history and your cultural thought, little by little has worked on me over the years. So we'll talk about that off the air, or maybe in the next episode or something. But, but it's a two-way street here, my friend.
Yes, sir. I love it. I will go on a two-way street with you anytime you want. Let's do this again.
Thanks, man.
Thank you, Tom. Have a great one.
Okay, thank you. All right, see you later.
Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay, everybody, before we go, I want to remind you, go avail yourselves of the great deal Thad Russell has on some great bundles of courses at his Renegade University. 25% off when you go to renegadeuniversity.com/woods. Tomorrow on the show, Mark Crispin Miller of New York University joins me. Mark Crispin Miller is clearly and obviously on the left. And man, is he anti-lockdown. He loved my video on that subject. So then I started looking into him, and he's a fascinating guy. So we're just going to have a freewheeling discussion tomorrow, and you're just going to love it. So make sure you subscribe at tomwoods.com/Apple, and I'll see you then.
Become a smarter libertarian in just 30 minutes a day. Visit tomwoods.com to subscribe to the show for free, and we'll see you next time.
Like the sound of The Tom Woods Show? My audio production is provided by Podsworth Media. Check them out at podsworth.com.